Hey, Faith, I do not have permission to record.
No problem.
And if you, Alec just joined us, he's on my team. If you can move him as a guest, as opposed to a panelist, if it makes any difference.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We are getting settled into place this morning, and we will get started with today's boot camp session in just a moment. Thanks so much for joining us. Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it just a few more moments to make sure everyone is able to join today's session, and then we will jump into all of the great content for today. All right, well, good morning and welcome to today's Small Business Boot Camp. My name is Faith Ritchie and I'm the Small Business Programs Manager, filling in for usual host, Robert Theobald. If you are new to these boot camp sessions, we first and foremost always like to give thanks and acknowledgement to our many community partners who, without their expertise and time, we would not be able to make these amazing free sessions possible. Now, the Small Business Boot Camp was formally designed to assist small businesses of less than 20 employees return from the COVID crisis. It continues to provide content to assist small businesses prepare for success, plan for the future, and grow a thriving business. It continues to be a statewide initiative supported by our network of community partners and hosts a content library and newly added workshop series of extended topics. The content library is a collection of more than 200 recorded webinar sessions covering many different topics, strategies, and tools to assist entrepreneurs and businesses succeed. We will, as always, be sharing those links in the chat. So if you have not visited the content library, you will get that link, and we encourage you to check out all of those previous sessions. Additionally, the ACA has other services and resources available to assist the small business community throughout the state. So whether you are looking to start, grow, or scale, there may be additional resources available for you. For information regarding these programs that you're seeing on your screen, please visit the Arizona Commerce Authority's webpage. Now, looking to start, operate, and grow in Arizona, the ACA hosts the Small Business Checklist, which is an interactive online guide to help answer all of those commonly requested licensing questions for local, state, and federal levels. We've also implemented Sally. Sally is your guide and assistance to answer all of those quick questions that you may have. So if you're not setting up a checklist, you can always ask Sally to make sure you have all of your needs met for your business. Here is a look ahead for some of our sessions. Of course, today we are excited to welcome back Mark Kirstein for 5 cybersecurity tips to avoid when being hacked. But then we also have an upcoming 2-part series for your growth. So those barriers for growth session will be happening next Tuesday, May 31st, followed by Tuesday, June 7th, part 2. Excuse me. Now, for the reason you are all here today, I had already kind of given it away with Mark Kirstein returning, for our 5 tips for cybersecurity, but we're also happy to welcome Timothy Hayes. This is Timothy's first time joining the Small Business Bootcamp, so I am looking forward to this discussion. And as always, these slides and presentation will be made available later on our website, so you can go back and dive into all of the great information I am sure these 2 presenters will provide. So without further ado, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn the time over to Mark and Tim.
All right, thank you, Faith. Appreciate the introduction and all the great resources that the ACA is bringing to the small business community. Hopefully, between Tim and I, we can also become part of that resource mix and add a few additional perspectives on things that small and medium businesses in Arizona should be doing to protect themselves from the bad guys out there, as there are way too many of them. As we get started here, I'm just going to give a little bit of context for where I come from and where Tim comes from. I'll let Tim elaborate a little bit on that as well. But myself, I'm VP of Customer Success for Cosant Cybersecurity, and we're a cybersecurity consultant, and we help small and medium businesses build an information security program, essentially to reduce their risks, to make sure that they're compliant with any regulations as far as cybersecurity, which there are a lot of, and to develop policies, processes, documentation that then leads to the implementation of cybersecurity at the technical level, which is where Tim and his company, Phoenix IT, come in. I'll let you elaborate in a minute, Tim. But Tim is one of our partners, one of many partners that we work with to help those businesses, protect themselves. Does a lot of incident response, cybersecurity breaches and responding to those, but also is a managed service provider that provides IT services that helps to do the technical side. Tim, go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Faith, for allowing me the chance to be here. And good morning, everyone. My name is Timothy Hayes. I'm the Director of Vincent Response for Phoenix IT. And just like Mark was saying, we are a local MSP. So we have local clients here that we cater to on the MSP side, mainly with on-site service. That's what our specialty is. And then alongside that, we are also on the recovery scene for incident response engagement. So we have techs that are sent all over the United States to assist with recovering companies from ransomware attacks. And it's a good merger and kind of the synergy between the 2 parts of the company, because we're able to apply real life lessons learned from these poor companies that are hit by ransomware and apply that to our client base here in Phoenix. So it's interesting, and a lot of what we're exposed to are things that I just never even thought about being a possibility, in terms of who's getting hit, how often they're getting hit, the reasons why they're getting hit, things like that. So what Mark has put together here and what I'll help provide some details on are very much in everyone's best interest to keep in mind, because at the end of the day, everything we're talking about here is a reality for everybody. And I think that's the biggest takeaway here, is this is going to be worth everyone paying attention and really taking to heart what's being talked about, just for the simple fact that we're all in the same boat here. We're all unfortunately targets. And I'm sorry, Mark, I started going down the darker side of that. So.
Oh, no worries at all. So what we're going to do, it's going to be a bit of a dialogue between Tim and I. We're going to give you guys some real world tips of things that you can do as a business to try to reduce your likelihood of being compromised, but also keep in mind, one of the mindsets and approaches that we like to share in the cybersecurity world is, when you are compromised, what are you going to do about it? Because all businesses at some level will have some type of an incident one way or another, and your preparedness for that, not just preventing it, but also responding to the inevitable, that gets through or has the potential to cause a breach, is just as important as putting in those preventative measures. And we're going to make it real, because these are things that are happening to big companies. They're also things that are happening to very small companies. So we'll provide a good amount of examples and anecdotal pieces that, that hopefully will resonate with you and let you see what's happening out there and take proactive steps to avoid becoming a victim. So I'm going to assume and double check with Tim that you can see the screen correctly.
Yes, sir.
Good.
That's good.
You don't want to take anything for granted. By the way, for the audience that's with us right now, feel free as we roll along to put in any questions, observations, feedback in the chat window. If it's some question that's directly relevant to the slide or the topic that we're talking to, we'll do our best to address those real time during the presentation. If we don't recognize them or address them during the presentation, we'll reserve about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to make sure that we cover as many of those questions as possible. So one of the things that I hear all the time, and it kind of makes my skin cringe a little bit still, but the mindset of it won't happen to me, or if I'm a small business, I'm too small to be a cybersecurity target or to be a cybersecurity breach. And when you live in the industry and you see companies as small as single person operations that have been compromised or had an incident, you realize that it's not the case. And Tim can probably provide an example of that in a moment, but I'll provide perspective before I hand it off to Tim for his thoughts. First of all, you may be directly targeted, but generally, if you're directly targeted, you're, somebody's whale hunting, somebody's specifically looking at you or your company to try to compromise. It's because you've got some type of high profile. It's because you have some type of high value customers, so it may not be you they're after. They may be after your customers and they see you as an opportunity to get through them. But that, that's for most small businesses and medium businesses, direct targeting is not where you need to worry about. And when you say I'm too small to be a cybersecurity, for this particular segment, maybe so. Now we move into the middle segment, which is, they're addressing particular industries, particular types of companies, particular types of individuals, and they craft their messaging and their attacks to a particular segment. It may be a healthcare message, it may be a COVID message, it may be, whatever they can do to try to trick you in. But the biggest thing for small and medium businesses to think about is they're net phishing. They're not targeting. They're looking to cast a wide net to send out and try to capture as broad as possible of a swath. And it may be sending out emails and looking for a phishing attack. It may be just trying to hit your network and see if you have any of the vulnerabilities that they know about that you may or may not know about. But they're looking for anything that they can get into. And at that stage, they're not worried about who you are as a company, how big you are, what assets you have. They worry about that later, after they've caught you, after they've pulled you into the boat. And the only decision they have to make now is, do I keep this one or do I throw it away? And because it's a fairly sophisticated cybersecurity hacking industry, maybe I don't want it for myself. I may sell you. I have caught you and I sell you to some other hacker that takes advantage of that. Tim, you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So I think what you've got here, Mark, is really important, and especially the whatever falls into the net category, because everybody here falls into the net and every one of our employees falls in the net as well. And to really put this in perspective, a lot of the threat actors, they are doing the direct targets. So they're going after larger companies, they're obtaining information that's posted on the dark web, that they can buy so that they can start gaining access and doing recon within business environments, things like that. Those are very, very direct, very targeted, but it's also a very, very small percentage of kind of like that threat landscape. The reality is a lot of what threat actor groups are doing is they're leaving payloads to be discovered and then automatically kind of unleashed on networks. And those payloads are usually discovered by just regular users or just, people. So you've got employees, they might have a phishing email sent to their personal email, but then they open that while they're at work on their company environment, and then immediately they're unleashing some type of payload that's in there. And this is all automated. So these phishing emails are sent out in the millions, and they're just hoping that there's, a couple hundred that end up clicking on it. And from there, they're hoping that there's even a couple dozen or even just a dozen where that attack actually takes root. So it's kind of the shotgun approach where they're trying to get the most number of people involved in what could potentially be an attack. And it whittles down to, okay, they only got 12 people, but that's 12 people that, weren't attacked yesterday. And it's just because they opened up a phishing email. And on the other side of that, these threat actors are constantly scanning to see what open ports and services are out there on the internet. And this isn't a hard thing to do. I think there's 4.5, just under 5 billion public IPs. That's their entire landscape right there. So threat actors can actually scan the entirety of every single publicly available IP address to see what might be open and available to communicate. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just trying to put some perspective in. These things are happening every day, and it's encompassing a lot more people than people think.
Well, and we see, if we look at the statistics, we're going to give you kind of, as an audience, a view of the broad picture, and then we'll narrow it into some of the specific things that you can do. But you can see the increase is going from year to year. Percentage of organizations, of all sizes that are compromised, and most of these are small and medium businesses, simply because that's where the numbers are, that are compromised, is now over 86%. So there's a huge percentage, because all they need to find is one vulnerability, one open port, one wrong click on an email, one employee that has logged into a nefarious wireless access point, and they get into your business, and they can continue to move and see how they can exploit you and how they can turn you into that criminal. So if we look at a few of these big picture ones, these are ones that you would recognize. So we bring these up as, in this context, as ones that have made the news, that we might have heard of, that are driving the industry as far as the big payouts, and having an impact that filters down to the smaller businesses. As we get into specific tips, we'll talk about some small business exploits that aren't on the news, that Tim, by nature of doing incident response, sees, or sometimes we see as well. But the big one that we've all heard of is ransomware, right? And ransomware basically means the bad actor has got into your system and gotten enough access to be able to encrypt your data and hold it hostage. And they may be holding it hostage for one of two purposes. Both purposes lead to money. We'll see that in a moment. But one of two purposes: either they threaten to expose the private data to the open internet, and if you've got valuable private data and that's going to hurt you as a business, that compels you to want to pay the ransom. Or they just hold you hostage as far as the operations of your business, and you can't get back up and running unless you have either good backups or you can figure out how to pay the ransom. Second one is, to comment at this high level, is third-party vulnerabilities, meaning your suppliers, your customers, so this, you need to think of this as the entire ecosystem around your business, not just you protecting yourself, but your suppliers, your employees. They're all sources of compromise. And some of the biggest compromises have come from third-party vulnerabilities. Microsoft had a breach in their Exchange software, impacted thousands of organizations. Facebook had a breach, exposed thousands of PII data, and you can go on and on and on about some of these third parties that have exposed data. I'm going to combine 3 and 5 together a little bit, because Tim, you talked about the scanning and the companies that are looking out at the public IP addresses looking for vulnerabilities. So if you have an undetected security gap, the one that's noted here, Log4 Shell, may not have heard of it if you're not in the industry, but this one impacted tens of thousands of companies, maybe hundreds of thousands of companies, and the bad guys know what it is. And we still find the Log4 vulnerability exposed in clients that we work with. So it hasn't been eradicated. There's companies out there, if you don't know that this has been, that you are protected from this, it could be sitting in your network just waiting for somebody to stumble across you and then be able to exploit you because of the vulnerability that is embedded in your IT infrastructure. And misconfigured services is very similar. It's, you know, the settings on your platforms aren't hardened. Last one I'll share, and again, this one's very, very big for small businesses, compromised passwords. You know, one of the biggest breaches of the year, Colonial Pipeline, had brought down half the energy infrastructure on the East Coast, was simply due to a bad or easily guessed password. So people reuse passwords, people use simple passwords. There's a reason why, you know, from an IT perspective, we try to create complex passwords, and we'll advise you never reuse your passwords, you know, multiple places. Average ransomware payment, $140,000. That includes small businesses. So, you know, if you think that you're immune at a small business, you know, what we heard 5 to 10 years ago was people said, hey, I got a ransomware, I paid $5,000 or I paid $10,000. Today, those numbers are, for tiny businesses, $20,000 or $50,000. For large businesses, they're in the millions. Tim, any comments or thoughts on what we're talking about in this context?
Yeah, I've always got a few, and for this one specifically, the ransomware payment's interesting because the threat actors now, if they're inside your environment, they are taking their time to look for specific documents that are going to give them power and negotiation and leverage for that. And a good example is last month we were helping out with a hospital that was infected with ransomware. They're completely down, and the threat actors were asking for $10 million. And they knew exactly what to ask for because they had financial reports, they had financial data from this hospital that they knew that this ask is well within their means to give. So these are targeted numbers that they're not just throwing a dart at the board for. They are pulling these numbers very strategically, and then they're not budging when the negotiations are happening because they're falling back on that data. And something else to add on top of that, Mark, is that's the average ransomware payment. I think the average downtime for a company hit with ransomware is 16 days. So just over 2 weeks of zero operational capability. And that number is going to vary, you know, based on, you know, your mileage may vary here based on what stop guards you have in place, if your backups are good, and how quickly you can recover. But at the end of the day, you know, even if it's less than 16 days, anything more than 1 or 2 is going to be extremely painful for most businesses. So something to keep in mind there. And then the last thing I wanted to touch base on is that log4 shell exploit that Mark talked about. You'll notice on the slide it says unknown worldwide impact. And the reason for that is when this was found to be a major exploit, this log4 shell is embedded in a lot of software, a lot, it's everywhere. So when we first heard about this, we were just doing that quick dash to make sure that our clients were secured, because I would say every single one of them had a log4 shell exploit that was open. And we didn't know about it until we knew about it. So once we heard about it, we quickly shored everything up. But at the same time, you know, with us being in the incident response space, we have not really heard of these exploits being taken advantage of yet. And it's been a while since this came out. And for the conferences that we go to, for the panels that we go to and we're on, the thought here is with large exploits like this, and by large, just common, threat actors will usually wait a while for a cool down period, because when the world's notified, hey, here's a well-known, or here's a common security vulnerability everyone needs to fix. And it's like, okay, wow, this is massive. That's when the threat actors know that their guard's up, that they're going to be looking at their networks. Like this is, you know, it's in the news, it's trending on Twitter, everything like that. So they're going to wait a little bit. And then after that cool down period, it could be 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, then they'll go back to that. It seems to be cyclical, where the vulnerability will be brought up and exposed to the world, but then it cools off a little bit. And then a year later, it comes back and the threat actors start attacking it. And again, you know, mileage may vary here. Some threat actors are already exploiting these in small cases, but for the most part, we have not heard much of exploitation with that specific exploit. So unfortunately, it's still coming, and we're waiting for that other shoe to drop.
Yeah, I think that is one of the interesting things that I see in the security industry that kind of surprised me, you know, as I learned more and more about it. is that the bad actors don't act all that quickly as you might expect. Yeah, hey, I've gotten into this network, or I've gotten access to this person's email. I'm going to exploit them. I'm going to take them for ransomware or fraud them instantaneously. No, they're more sophisticated than that in many instances, where they dwell for a while, do reconnaissance, figure out how much they can get, and figure out how much further they can get, because they may have compromised your network and they may suddenly figure out, hey, this company's connected to a bigger hospital. Let's see if I can exploit that connection to that hospital and get to somebody bigger in this context. And that doesn't mean they're going to leave you alone. It just means they're going to wait and act on you later. Right. So those are the things that we need to think about. Is, we often will find when we do a risk assessment or a scan on companies' networks, that there's an exploit already in their system. They just didn't know about it, and it hasn't been exploited yet. And that's a lucky situation, right? Because if we move quickly, we can now respond to it. But at the same time, depending on how closely they're monitoring the situation, they may see that we've discovered it, and that may prompt them to then do the exploit. So if we look at these vulnerabilities that we just called out and what you should be thinking about, all of them basically lead to the money. And at one point or another, there's different paths that you gain access to the network. You may get access to the data, but ultimately you're trying to get to the money. These are businesses. For most exploits, they're businesses that are trying to get money or get paid. For a few instances, they may be more vandalism, where people are just trying to disrupt you because they can, and they're not very sophisticated organizations. Or a few might be state actors, where their more interest is more in the intellectual property and the disruption they can cause. But most of the things you need to worry about are going to be financial based. I get ransomware, I get payment. I do a business email compromise, I orchestrate a fraud, I get payment. I exploit third-party vulnerabilities or other activities, which gives me access to the data, which gives me to the money. Compromised password, which gives me access to the data, which gives me access to the money. So all of these basically are business orientation, as our biggest threat, biggest thing that we should be worried about. Now, Tim, you and I talked about this when preparing for our discussion today. How many things that we're talking about when we talk about cybersecurity? Because it's easy to look at it and say, oh, cybersecurity is technology, it's IT, it's complicated. I don't understand IP addresses or configurations or these kind of things. And you don't need to understand all the technical details as long as you have an MSP or an IT help or somebody on your team that can address those things. But there's a lot of analogies that I think of as just do the basic things. Don't leave your doors unlocked. Don't leave your windows down. So Tim, elaborate a little bit on this particular diagram as to how cybersecurity kind of relates to locking your car.
Yeah, no, of course, Mark. And I think what it really boils down to is you don't even think twice about when you park your car at a public parking spot and you walk away, you lock it. It's muscle memory at that point. You're not consciously leaving it unlocked. And if you found out it is, you'd lock it immediately. So just that singular example, translating it to IT security, there are a number of things you can do for your business and on the IT side that will greatly strengthen your security hardening, your security presence, that really should be treated as, just not even having to think about it, just something that you just make so common, because these are really easy things to do and you can automate most of them. And Mark's going to go into detail about quite a few of them in a little bit. But at the end of the day, these are things that you can't overlook for the simple fact, based on how simple they are, on how little time they take to implement and to do. And it's really on probably like a monthly cadence. So it's really not even asking that much. But these are things that if you can do these simple items, you will be in a better security standing than probably 90% of companies out there. And that includes, Fortune 100 companies all the way to the newest entrepreneurial shop that just opened down the corner. These are things that people, they assume are being handled by whoever handles their tech. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but these are items that really just need to be brought up and discussed in terms of, okay, what's our cadence for doing these things and how are we verifying that they've been completed?
Well, and when you think of, criminals basically being opportunistic, they're casting a net, hoping somebody falls into the net, and an opportunistic opportunity, they're making choices between what's the easiest exploit that I can get. And so, kind of aligning that to the car, if you have parked your car and your windows are down and your keys are on the dashboard and you've got a briefcase of money and electronics in the back seat, that's a pretty attractive target, right? And that's easy. And it's sitting next to a car that's got the doors locked, that has hidden the valuables, that didn't leave the keys in the car, and has the alarm turned on. As a bad actor, who are you going to go after? You're going after the low-hanging fruit. You're going after the easy opportunity. And the things we're going to show you guys, really, for the most part, are about locking your doors and about setting the alarm and about being able to respond to the situations as they happen, which will deter most of the situations that might come into your small business and prepare you if you get compromised anyways. So let's take a look at a few of those. As we put it together here, again, I want to make sure that we're always thinking of, people, process, and technology, not just technology. Cybersecurity is not all about technology. It's easy to put it into the context of IT and the internet and those type of things, but most compromises are driven by people making mistakes or processes that weren't put in place to do the right thing at the right time. And the technology underlies that. But the things that we'll talk about and things you can do will be put into this context of people, process, and technology, and how those come together to protect your organization. And what can happen to you. So again, these apply to all of the compromises that we're going to talk to for the most part. What are the compromises? Ransomware, fraud, means to an end, meaning a third party, vulnerability, and you as are compromised because they're trying to get to your employees, or they're trying to get to your customers or suppliers, or they're trying to use your IT infrastructure to propagate fraud against other organizations. So they hijack you and they use you as cover for themselves. Or it might be vandalism. There are still bad actors out there that are just having fun, just playing. They manage to get a compromise. They get inside your system and they go, hey, it'd be fun if we posted bad things to your website, or we brought you down for a day. So there's those things that you need to worry about as well. 3 things that you need to worry about from a consequence standpoint: destroying or corrupting essential data. That's the underlying hinge for ransomware in particular, is that the data is critical to my operation. And if I can compromise it, I can take advantage of it. I might just corrupt it and use that as a means of fraud as well. Crippling your operations, taking you down, taking you out of service so you can't execute on your business mission or vision. Or exposing confidential data. And I don't want to leave behind exposing confidential data because it is so critical. You talked, Tim, before about the ransomware payment is, $130,000 on average, et cetera. But typically the cost of recovering from a ransomware incident exceeds what the ransomware payment is, even if you pay it. You got to, rebuild your infrastructure. Even if they give you the encryption keys, you can restore the data. You've got to now protect your infrastructure. If you've exposed confidential data to the outside world, there's a whole host of notification requirements for personal information that's exposed, where you have to notify those people, or personal health information exposed where you need to respond in the HIPAA regulations. Both of those often have consequences that are far more significant than the operational day-to-day activity. The cost of notifying tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of consumers and businesses that you have exposed their data can be staggering, and can cripple a small business in particular.
Yep, and that's twofold too, Mark, because they're not sure if all of their customer data has been exposed, so they have to notify everyone anyway. And then this is also information that the threat actor uses as part of their leverage in negotiations. Hey, we exfiltrated, 1 terabyte of your data. We're gonna, release it, leak it, expose it, whatever it is, unless you pay us, kind of a thing. And Mark, I see that I missed a few questions in the chat, but it actually pertains to this slide. So after you go through this slide, I can answer these questions. It'll be topical.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so there's just a handful of things. Again, there's many, many more things that you can do, but we're trying to prioritize. At the end, we'll show you just the top 5 that we titled the presentation after. Ransomware is a great example of all 3 of these: people, process, and technology all coming together to protect you. It's kind of an even balance, but number 1, back up your data. Make sure that you have a cloud storage, that you have local storage, that you have applications to back up data on a regular basis. If confidentiality is not your biggest concern, because the data itself is not so sensitive or won't trigger notification rules, you're having a backup that you can restore quickly can enable you to recover from a ransomware without having to pay the ransomware in order to get the data back. But most companies, or many companies, even if they back up their data, they haven't tested it, and often they will find when they do test it that there's challenges or flaws that pop up. So you need to also test it. Enable multi-factor authentication. I'm going to pause on that one for a moment and return to it. It's a huge factor. It's one of the I want to really highlight heavily here, but we'll circle back to it in a minute. Security training and awareness. This is all about people. This is what we're doing today. I mean, we are doing security training. We're making you aware of the threats and giving you recommendations, but make sure that all of your employees are aware of what the threats are and what they should be doing behavior-wise. And think of it both on behalf of your business, but also on behalf of your personal situation, your personal bank accounts, your personal life that you're living, but also for your parents and your siblings that may not be receiving these type of things. We collectively as a society need to look out for each other and make each other aware of things not to do or to do. And then this other one, encrypt sensitive data. Again, we talked about backing up data if you weren't worried about the confidentiality. If you are worried about the confidentiality, make sure that the confidential data, personal information or health information or other confidential data is encrypted. And then if the bad guys get it, they may be able to stop you from operating your business, but they can't expose it when it's encrypted. Tim, multi-factor authentication is hugely important. Describe for the audience what that is in case anybody's not already familiar with it.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry, you asked multi-factor authentication, Mark?
Yeah.
So the MFA is basically, it's an additional step when you're trying to log into anything that has that trust barrier. That trust barrier being, I want to access this information, I want to go to this site, but I don't want everyone to go to it. So there's that trust barrier in place that I need to verify who I am. And everyone does this every day when they're logging into their work computer, or even when they're unlocking their phone, they're doing their fingerprint or they're doing their password, whatever it is. Multi-factor authentication is adding one more step to that, at least one more step, but usually just one more step. So it's using an application like Duo or Okta. And it's after you put in your password, you are then prompted for, okay, now give us your one-time code or approve the push notification that was sent to your phone. So it's just an additional step, and it's something that can't necessarily be quantified in terms of, here's Mark's login and it's for sale, for $50. Who wants it? They can log into whatever Mark can get into at this login. If they have someone's login, but they can't, if their MFA is untouched and they're not able to get around that, which is most of the time, then that account is still inherently safe, because they could try and log in as Mark, but then they're going to be prompted for that second code, which is again like a rolling code, something that changes, something that's not static, and they're not going to be able to get past that. And
yeah, at this stage, I'd say a lot of consumers, you've seen these multi-factor authentications, I hope. At this stage, it sends you a text message, or you use an authenticator application to do that second, form of authentication. But I will tell our audience here, if you have not turned on multi-factor authentication, first, critically for all of your financial institutions, your financial institution has multi-factor available. Make sure you turn it on. your brokerage accounts, your personal bank accounts, your business bank accounts, turn those things on. Anything else, any application that you use that has any sensitive data whatsoever, turn it on. After that, you can make some judgments as to when to turn it on or not turn it on, but do these kind of things, you'll protect yourself at a much different level.
Absolutely.
Ken, I saw a few, or I'm sorry, Tim, Ken's one of our questions, but a couple of questions about the supply chain, and we can address that in a slide that's coming up in a minute, but also about insurance and backup technology. Can you weigh in on that real quick?
Yeah, of course. I'll go through the questions that are in there. Apologies to everyone for missing those when they were posted for the slides originally. Going back to the first question from Paul, he's asking, are there insurance policies which cover data breach costs such as ransomware demands? Yes. So I can't speak too much into this in terms of I'm not very involved in the insurance world, but we do work with insurance companies quite a bit for these ransomware engagements. And there is cyber liability insurance and different flavors of it. This is something that's constantly evolving in the insurance world because 5-10 years ago, ransomware and attacks like that, they were known, they were happening, but they weren't as common and prevalent as they are today. So insurance companies are now, they're getting wise to the fact that they're losing a lot of money having to do these payments. So insurance companies are now requiring that certain policies and procedures are put in place before they will actually insure you for cyber security liability and things like that. So exactly what Mark has here on the slide, backing up your data, enabling MFA, doing user training, encrypting sensitive data. These are some items that some insurance companies are requiring before they will give you any insurance coverage in that cybersecurity space. And then to further answer your question, Paul, yes. So if you have a cybersecurity liability, some type of liability coverage, and you're involved in an event, you would submit a claim on that. And if it's approved, then they would open up whatever the amount is for that specific claim. It's going to differ, depending on how much you're paying for the claim, what it's for, things like that. There's no one size fits all. But for an example, for that hospital that I was mentioning earlier, that $10 million ransomware payment, that was potentially coming out of their cyber liability claim. And the insurance company, they're bringing on negotiators. So they're bringing on forensic companies, because when insurance companies have to pay money out, they're going to be, dang well sure that they're paying it for exactly what it's supposed to go to, and there's no leeway there. So they're very much going to be getting to the bottom of how did this, attack occur and things like that. And then they'll handle the negotiation and also things like that. And it might be a little unfair for me to bring this up because these are like the larger claims in insurance policies where they're probably, I don't know how much they're paying a month, but it probably, turn my stomach. For, small and medium-sized companies and businesses, when we've done engagements for them, they also most of them have cyber liability insurance, and they do submit their claim, and it's been approved. But some of their insurance policies will not allow ransoms to be paid with that money, and they just have certain regulations and stipulations with that. So it's a little bit of, it's going to be different for every insurance carrier, unfortunately.
Yeah, two things I would comment on the insurance side. One is that the rates on cyber insurance are increasing dramatically. I just saw a story this morning. My rates went up 90%. What should I do? And how do I apply? And that's because the cost of covering people has gone up. Second one is make sure that you scrutinize your insurance policy with other trusted advisors, your IT company, other insurance agents, because we do see a lot of insurance policies that I don't know if a lot is the right word, but there are insurance policies out there for cyber insurance that have so many disclaimers and caveats embedded into the policy that they won't cover you when you get compromised. We've seen ones that say if unauthorized software was installed in your network, then we're not going to cover you. Or if employees caused the breach, we weren't going to cover you. Well, that's where most ransomware and breaches come from, is employees doing the wrong thing, or the bad guys installing unauthorized software. So you're excluding some of the major elements.
Very true, Mark. Mark, do you want me to go through the rest of these questions?
Yeah, but good, but very quickly, because we don't have a huge amount of time left, and I want to make sure we cover the 5 tips that we have for the audience. So, we can follow up afterwards as well with more detailed answers.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll do a quick answer round here, and apologies if I'm not as detailed as you might want me to be. I'm happy to talk later. So a question from Anonymous. I heard during a recent cybersecurity workshop that businesses need to also be verifying vendors due to potential exploits and vulnerabilities being embedded into hardware that ships from other countries. Can you speak to this and how best to protect against these possible threats? Great questions. Wow. I mean, that's good to be thinking about that. So tough to answer. The biggest thing would be is if you know what countries and what manufacturers are shipping these devices that you're using for your business, I would just do a quick Google search for that company name, that country name, and then recent exploits or vulnerabilities. It's hard for me to answer this one in totality just because it's going to, without any specific examples, but you're absolutely right. Some of these other nation states, they're not as democratic as we are. So they're very much okay with embedding, nation state threats onto equipment to be shipped out in the world that specific threat actor, that state actor is going to use. Next question from Shauna. Similar to average payment, do you have a figure for the average cost for loss of business income due to ransomware? Shauna, great question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you because most companies won't, they don't provide that. They don't want anyone to know how much they might potentially be losing or are losing. And then it also changes depending on, what type, it might be a for-profit or a nonprofit, things like that. So it's a little all over the place.
Tim, we've got a couple of questions from Len that are very specific and very hardware oriented. And what I'm going to suggest is let's wait till the end. If we have enough time to address that, we'll address it live. If not, we'll follow up with the audience with some technical details.
Sounds good.
But I do want to make sure that we have some context and have enough time to cover the 5 security breaches that we started off our show here to do.
Yeah, of course.
So let's step a little bit into business email compromise, which is one of the major threat areas. It's basically the companies getting into your email system, either directly in and having control over it, or simply just defrauding, using email to defraud people so that they can get into your bank accounts or they can transfer funds. Much like we talked about in the last slide, enable multi-factor authentication. That will be a very common recommendation across all these threats. These type of threats for business email compromise, there's some technology that you can enable and that will help harden your environment and make these more difficult for the bad guys. But a lot of these are very much about people and about process. So make sure that you have employee policies and processes defined for your team when it comes to buying gift cards, when it comes to transferring funds, when it comes to changing payment account details. Those are the things that are at risk in a business email compromise. It all starts by telling your employees, here's what our policy is as a company, here's what our process is for executing these business activities, and here's the training that will show you how to go about doing it, so that you don't accidentally transfer $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 to the wrong person. Again, you can use more technology, tokenized key fob, callback prior to transfer. These are very similar to the multi-factor authentication or the second signature for transfers above a threshold. So just in very simple terms, what I would characterize is pick up the phone and call the other person. If somebody's asking you for gift cards, if somebody's asking you to change the payment details, I've changed my bank account for our invoices, please change my payment details, to this new bank account. Pick up the phone and call that person and say, hey, I got an email from you directing you that you've got a new bank account and have changed the invoice details. Is this really from you? That's all it takes to thwart some of these attempts. All right, and one of our audience asked about third-party vulnerabilities or about the context was I can buy hardware from overseas or from other countries that might have compromises built into them, and especially for larger companies, that's a bigger concern because people are looking for any way into your network. And there are some companies and governments that sponsor those type of things. But more broadly, what I'd like to do is you think about your business holistically and say, hey, I've got suppliers. Who are those suppliers, and what level of risk does each of those suppliers pose to my business from a cybersecurity perspective? And I've got customers. And what level of risk do I pose to my customers? Because many times if I become compromised, that becomes a connection to my customers, and they become compromised, and they don't like that. They don't like me after I do that. So we're seeing a lot of enterprise level customers now imposing cybersecurity requirements on their supplier base to try to protect themselves, much like the insurance companies were doing those requirements that you brought up before, Tim. But there's one vendor set that I want to call out in particular in this context, which is your managed service provider, just like Tim's company, Phoenix IT, but you guys are in the security realm and you're very proactive about what you're doing here. But many times we find small and medium businesses haven't asked their IT company two important and critical questions. First off, what are you doing to protect my company? Your standard IT service agreement, your standard managed service provider offering often doesn't include a lot of cybersecurity things. And if you do, it probably costs more. It's worth paying more to avoid a compromise. But it all starts by having a conversation with your IT company to say, what are you doing to protect my business? And then understanding, is this enough? Is it not enough? And if it's going to cost more, is there a good return on investment for that? And then ask them the second question that's equally important. What are they doing to protect themselves? And the reason why I put MSPs and IT companies as such a critical supplier in this space, they have access to all of your networks. So if they become compromised, you're compromised. So you need to ask them the question, how are you protecting your own, MSP IT business so that you don't end up being a vulnerability to me rather than being a savior to me? Tim, your world.
Yep, and I think the easiest way to sum this up to what Mark is saying is trust but verify. So you're trusting your IT provider to have your best interest in mind, but you want to verify that. So that's why you want to ask these questions and just make sure that you're on the same page. And it might lead to a conversation where like, oh, we're not actually doing that. And you thought they were, but it was just a miscommunication maybe when you're bringing them on. So then that might be something that they can start doing, whatever that thing is. But again, have that conversation, ask those questions, trust that they're doing what they think is best for you, but also verify that they actually are.
Yep. Yeah, and good practices for all of these is I want to limit access to only people who need it. So your IT company should be only having certain passwords and certain people who have access to the critical data, and end the session when you're not using that session. These are things that are going to protect you if they become compromised, that they can't then propagate that into your business, and build your contingency or incident response for when bad things do happen, including what happens if my software provider is compromised? What happens if my SaaS application is compromised? What happens if my MSP IT is compromised? What am I going to do about it? You don't want to be asking those questions and making up those answers on the fly at the time when you've been compromised. Now, we kind of stepped into this a little bit when we were talking about the Log4j, about other vulnerabilities. The bad guys know about these common vulnerabilities, because if you're in the security industry, there's new vulnerabilities, being uncovered all the time. There's a whole infrastructure around identifying what the vulnerabilities are and how much compromise they can have, how severe they are. And, while we in the security industry are paying attention to these every day and all the time, so are the bad guys, because they're aware, they're informed. We need to also look at that from our own perspective as, what do I need to do? How do I harden my data assets? Do I have all the right settings in email, in the firewalls, in the VPN, in the websites, in the WLAN, in the applications? Do I have the right configurations and settings, and am I aware of what vulnerabilities are set in those, so that I can turn them on, turn them off, or remediate the things that people know about? Very, very critical here. Update your hardware and software. old hardware and software. I know it's a pain in the butt. It's difficult to do, but old, out-of-date hardware and old, out-of-date software is a huge vulnerability. We run into it all the time. If you have computers running Windows XP or Windows 7, they really can't be secured at the level that you need them to be. So first off, end of life those devices or that software, upgrade to the latest version, apply software patches and updates, because most software patches and updates these days are built around remediating security vulnerabilities to stay modern and address these known vulnerabilities. If you've turned those off or you make them manual, you're losing out on that, and you may have these vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. And be ready to monitor and respond to anything that's going to be exploited. Tim, any thoughts on this one?
So this is what we're referring to at the very beginning when we're talking about locking your car, and it should just be muscle memory and you don't even need to think about it. Those were some of the items that really should just be done every month. No question, no bickering, no kind of wondering, why are we still doing this? These are the house keeping items that are going to keep your house in order on a security front, and they're easy to do. Honestly, talk with your IT provider about it. With this, Mark, is this slide deck going to be provided to the group? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be available through the ACA website, as well as the recording of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so you've got a list right here that you can talk to your IT or MSP provider for, and just make sure that they're doing those things, or if they have an answer form at least.
Okay, so now we're approaching the last couple slides, and as well as the last couple minutes of the available time that we have, but definitely not last but least, definitely last but first, secure your employees. Securing your employees starts by policy. You need to tell them what's acceptable and not acceptable and what the company expects. Acceptable use policies for what they're allowed or not allowed to do with their computers. Even more so if those are bring your own device or employee owned devices, that creates yet another challenge. Require them to generate security passwords that are automatically generated, complex, mix of numbers and letters, capitals and lowercase, symbols, etc. Those are what's going to make your security password much more robust. Don't save your passwords. Now, the web browser technology is getting better. It's getting close to what we call a password managers, but we highly recommend password managers if you know how to use one. Password managers basically save unique passwords and very complex passwords, so that you don't have to remember them all, so you don't have to write them down, so that they're very unique for every site. You want to use those devices if you can. If you can't because you're not comfortable with them or have some other reservation, then just use complex passphrases, long passwords, complex things that you might be able to remember. Train yourself, train your employees. Don't click on the links. Now, I said universally don't send gift cards. Obviously, we may want to send gift cards, but have some policies about how they go about sending gift cards, because the low-level fraud, you relies on gift cards a lot. They're transferable, value. Call first before you make changes and validate that you're getting the right direction and that your email hasn't been compromised or you're not being tricked. And identify how to recognize phishing or fraud. One of the things that we've recently kind of thrown up is don't click on the unsubscribe link on an email that comes in unless you know who that sender is. I see the question about LastPass getting hacked. LastPass, didn't expose anybody's passwords. They were compromised at some level, but all of the passwords and the detail behind that was encrypted. So the raw data wasn't exposed to date. The password managers, which use 256-bit encryption, very robust encryption. Nobody has ever compromised a password manager to actually get to the raw passwords, but you do need to protect your own password that gets you into the password manager. And usually that's with multi-factor authentication and a complex password. There's a whole bunch of technology details behind securing your employees as well. These, if you talk to your IT company, they'll know what these are. And these are settings that will make it harder for your employees to be tricked. And then our summary slide as we hit the end of our hour, things we've talked about already. Turn on multi-factor authentication, ensure all your software is updated and packaged, security awareness training for your employees, use password managers, and evaluate your third parties, your software suppliers, and especially your MSP. Have the discussion that we're talking about here with them so that they can help protect you. I see you've come on, Faith. So I'll hand it back to you to wrap us up.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Tim. We have no questions left in the Q&A, so thank you for tackling those questions, and thank you to all of you who asked your questions. If there were questions we were unable to get to today, please don't hesitate. Mark and Tim both have their information on the screen, and you can always email myself or Robert here at the Arizona Commerce Authority, and we are always happy to push those questions to our experts. So thank you again, Mark and Tim. It's always so wonderful to have these presentations because it gets scary, but it's so good to know that there are people like you all who can give this information and advice to all of our small businesses out there so no one can be a victim. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up today's session. Please join us next week as we go into our two-part growth series. Again, Tuesday at 9 a.m. As Tim and Mark mentioned, today's slides and recording will be available on the Arizona Commerce Authority's website and will be available for you later today. So thank you all again for joining. Again, Mark and Tim, thank you so much for your time and expertise in answering all of those questions. I am sure we will have you back in no time. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks. Bye-bye.